so nice to see people from all around the world joining. Some people in Europe obviously up quite late. Some people in Latin America where the evening is just beginning, I guess. Thank you very much for coming to this session. So here we go. The title of the session is Making Learning Last, and that's really the question before us. How do we make learning more memorable? I realize that this is a big question, and probably the first thing I should say to you is that there's not one single answer to it. There's not a magic bullet, and I'm sorry if you came here looking for that. We're just going to explore various ideas. Of course, tricks exist for consciously remembering things in the short term, and some of those may have relevance here for our discussion. But actually less is known why on a more subconscious level we remember some things and not other things. So the first thing I want to do is just to show you a few of the things that I remember that have stuck in my long-term memory. Things, if you like, that are etched into my memory. And here is the first one, this fact. Einstein didn't wear socks. I learnt this some years ago. He had particularly long, big toes, and his toes stuck through his socks, and consequently he stopped wearing socks. So that's a fact I remember. I remember this image. This is actually an image from one of my books, Life Upper Intermediate, and it's a picture of a teenage girl in a middle-class family growing up in modern-day China. And that's an image that's stuck in my memory. I remember visiting Bucharest. I see there are some people from Romania here tonight, in fact. This was about 2 years ago. But strangely, the thing that sticks in my memory from visiting Bucharest, among many things I did there and places I visited there, is walking across a piece of kind of industrial waste ground to find a supermarket. The question is, why that memory? Why don't I remember the historical sites, for example, Ceausescu's palace or the old city centre? Why don't I remember a delightful evening I had in a restaurant downtown? Why don't I remember the conference I was at so strongly as I remember that particular memory? I think the thing is that ultimately we don't choose what we remember. Our memories actually choose us to a greater or lesser extent. We can try techniques to consciously commit things to memory, and sometimes those things work. And perhaps we could just begin there. I could begin by asking you, what do you do when you're trying to remember something, when you're trying to remember information, perhaps when you're learning a language and you're trying to remember a piece of language? What techniques do you use? Do you repeat and rehearse? Do you write stuff down? Do you test yourself sometimes? Do you make associations? Could you just put down your ideas in the chat box there? Sorry. Okay. Good. Yeah. People saying associations, people saying they visualize, fantastic. Repeat, try to make connections. Good. Yeah. Repeating things. Okay. Good. A lot of people, some people say mnemonics, a lot of people saying visualization and associations, and that's very interesting to me because it's something that I do also, particularly if I'm trying to remember passwords or something like that. That idea of using associations to help remember things actually has a long history. It goes back to kind of classical times, and it's still used today in feats of memory. For example, when somebody tries to remember all the order of cards that have been shuffled randomly, 52 cards in a pack. And some people can do some amazing things. They can remember 1, 2, sometimes 3 packs at a time, the order of all the cards, having looked at them once, by using associations. And they do that using a technique called the memory palace, where they attach certain numbers or certain cards to certain objects and places in their memory. And as I say, I use this myself for passwords. I don't know about you, but I find that if I use familiar names, like if I use my wife's maiden name, for example, or something like that, or one of my children's middle names or something, what tends to happen is I forget which one of those names I've chosen. I do the same thing with dates. If I choose what's supposed to be a familiar date, I often find I forget it. So instead, I might choose a particular image. One of my passwords, and I won't use it again after this webinar today, is this one, Boots for Barack. And I came to that by imagining Barack Obama standing in my wardrobe wearing a pair of cowboy boots. Okay, so there's one. You might do something similar. I recommend it. It's a good technique. But what I really want to do today is to explore the various factors that influence longer-term memory and learning. And then we're going to look at, or as we go along, we're going to look at how we might apply these to the teaching of language, so that that language has the best chance of sticking. Okay, and these are the main areas that I think are key in this process. So the first 3 things, and we'll see in a moment how these work, are imagery, so the use of images, and as people have already alluded to, the use of visualization, the use of stories, and the role of emotion in longer-term memory. The second 3 things we'll look at are to do with repetition. These are things that very often we use more in shorter-term memory when we try to commit things to our working memory. Repetition, variation, and also multi-sensory learning, using more than one sense in the acquisition of information. The next thing will be relatability, that is to say how easily you can relate to the information that you're trying to remember, whether it has resonance or meaning for you, and what's called the utility factor. That's to say how useful language is to you, or a particular piece of language is to you. And the last thing is the question of use and practice, how often you actually put it into effect, and peer teaching. Okay, so those are the areas we're going to look at. Let's just start with the first 3. The first 3 are very much to do with the question of impact. So images, stories, and emotion, they're all really about the impact with which the object of remembering hits you. I'll give you an example of this. One of the lessons which I've taught from actually when I started out teaching a long time ago was teaching the vocabulary of everyday injuries. Things like bumping your head, or stubbing your toe, or catching your fingers in the door, or poking yourself in the eye, those kinds of expressions and collocations. And I found the most effective way to do this was, before I went into the class, with no warning to the students that that was what we were going to do, was to come in carrying a cup, usually like a plastic cup, not a mug like this, but a plastic cup or a paper cup. And as I came into the classroom, I would trip up and spill the cup on the floor. The cup would roll under a desk. I'd bend down to pick it up, bump my head as I came up, and then stub my toe on the table leg, and so on. Okay. Apart from leaving me with a few bumps and bruises, as it often did, it actually left students with a very strong mental image. And we'd then go on, and I'd then introduce the language and ask them to tell me what it is, just to recount the events as they had happened. And as they recounted them, I would then supply them with the phrases that they needed if they didn't know them, like stubbing your toe and so on and so forth. And it was actually much more effective than just using cartoons or images. Images themselves, photos, can have a similar effect. But one problem, I think, with images these days is that they've become very common. As we all know, people exchange images now almost as frequently as they exchange words. And their commonness as a currency has kind of diluted their impact. And the reason I'm saying that is because what we need is powerful images. Perhaps if you think of it in terms of advertising, when advertisers want to promote their product to you, the first thing they have to do is catch your attention. Advertisers call it stopping power. There's no point, they're not going to be able to convince you of the benefits of their product unless first they've made you stop and pay attention. So they use images a bit like this one here. It's rather clever. It's an advertisement for Nivea night cream, and as you can see, they've made a play on the idea of the night and a lunar eclipse here. And it's kind of the same with language. If we're trying to make language more memorable and to grab students' attention as we teach them language, we've really got to use powerful images to do that. I'm going to show you in a moment a couple of images. And we're going to look at some language, or I ask you to brainstorm some language to do with friends and friendship. So what I want you to do now is to think of as many words as you can that collocate with the word friend. That is to say, as many adjective and noun, the noun is friend, combinations as you can. So for example, you might have a good friend or an old friend. Could you just type in the box now any other ideas that come to mind? Good, we got a mutual friend, that's fantastic. Best friend, lovely. A loyal friend, good. A fair weather friend, very nice. A school friend, close friend, good. Reliable, nice. Good, good. Lifelong friend, fantastic. Yep, a real friend, good. True friend. Very nice. Okay, good. And a few compound nouns as well. Girlfriend, boyfriend, a false friend. Ooh. Okay, good. Fantastic. That was very generative. Good. I'm now going to show you, so that's an activity I might do with a student, with a group of students, and then show them a picture to try and fix it. This is not actually a picture I would show them. I'm showing you this picture because it's a stock image. It's the kind of image that you see populating a lot of textbooks. What's happened is somebody's put the text on the page, the subject is friendship, and then they've asked a photo researcher to come in and bring in a photo which kind of reflects that idea. And you get something like this. It's what we call a stock image. It's the kind of image you see every day. It looks a little bit like something you might see in a dental brochure, perhaps, or something, everybody with these bright kind of cheesy smiles. How much more powerful is that image? I just want you to look at that image for a moment, and I want you then to apply some of the expressions that you might have seen, the collocations that you might have seen, and tell me which you think is most appropriate here. Which of those, so we had various things, faithful, lifelong, old, that sort of thing. Good, true friends, good. Yes, lifelong friends, people have said, lovely. Good, okay. Good, real friends, childhood friend, good, yes. Close, loyal, yeah. Good, yes, because you can see in the photo, doesn't it? It really conveys a very deep connection. Deep love, as somebody's actually commented on already, between these two men. Okay, that's what I mean by a powerful image. And as I say, because images are such a common currency now, it's very important that we use them to convey our meaning, and also to support discourse. So often when I'm writing, and in books with National Geographic, we do this. We try to support discourse with an image, whether that's a reading text or a listening text. In this case, you imagine your students are going to read an article. The supporting article here is about how teenage minds work, about the teenage brain, and how it's different from the adult brain. And so we ask students then to look at the photo and say, what's this guy doing? And what might it tell you about being a teenager? And so students naturally come up with ideas like they like taking risks, that sort of thing. They like adventure. Yeah, they're sort of free-spirited, as someone's just commented. Exactly. And the article goes on to support that, in fact, and makes that point that they actually like seeking out danger and new experiences because that's what's going to happen to them in adult life, and it's a kind of preparation for it. And it's an interesting article, and hopefully the image of the teenager doing that sticks with them and supports the discourse. So that's images. There's also the question, that's external images, but as well as using physical images, it's also very important to encourage students to visualize. And there's a good reason for that, because the images that we create in our own imaginations are, in fact, often more powerful and more lingering. They stay with us longer than external images. So I'm just going to say 3 short phrases to you, and I want you to, you can close your eyes if you like, or simply I want you to imagine and look into your mind and say, what is it? What is the image that's created when I say these 3 things? Okay? So if you're ready, the first one is a nosy neighbor. A nosy neighbor. Okay, good. So someone said my neighbor, someone's got other things. Good, not polite. Images of people doing things, looking over a fence, for example. The image of somebody with a very big nose. Okay, nice. The second one is a cozy restaurant. A cozy restaurant. Good, warmth, comfy sofa. We've got candles, soft lights. Very nice. Dimmed lights. Nice music. Okay. Good. A good time, and so on. Good. And the last one is rosy cheeks. Rosy cheeks. Good. People saying pink, children, innocent faces. Good. Nice. A chubby baby. Very nice. Good. Playful kids. Good, that's fantastic. What's interesting here is that you get different things. You get some people actually referring or relating it directly to their own experience, people they know. Other things like a sort of caricature, like a sort of very big nose or something, in the case of a nosy neighbor, or in other cases images like people looking over the fence. So everybody has a different angle on it, but that idea of visualization, it's a personal thing, but it helps those things, you relate to them and it helps them stick in your memory. It's actually a great tool in aiding comprehension of, for example, descriptive reading passages or listening passages, and I'd really strongly recommend that whenever you do text with students, as well as the comprehension exercises that accompany them, that you actually ask them what they saw, as it were, when they were reading or listening. What did a particular person look like? How did they imagine a particular place where some event or action took place? And to describe it, it's very generative at getting language out. And it also helps them to process that language more deeply and to think about the language. And more than that, simply, it gets them into the text better. It actually helps them comprehend because it means they're more engaged with the text itself. It's also actually kind of very useful, I think, in teaching pronunciation. It's a technique I try to use as often as possible in pronunciation. So, for example, if I was teaching the sound O, which is made with this kind of open mouth kind of position, you might then think of things which also had a kind of openness to them, like an open goal or a hole in the ozone. You've probably done similar things with the letter S, for example, we probably do this with children more, snake and so on, or with sleeping where you doze, and that idea, and it creates these mental images. So it's a very useful tool also in pronunciation. Good. So first encounter with language can really be enhanced by images, or whether that be direct vision or external images or visualization, images that you create in your imagination. It can also be enhanced by stories. And what we're going to do now is we're just going to watch a short video. It's actually a news report. It's a short news report, and it's taken from Life Upper Intermediate, the new edition of Life Upper Intermediate, and it's a video about technology. Okay? So it's from a unit about technology, and it's a video about technology. And I'd just like you to look.
For a girl with no hands, her dexterity is remarkable. Her drawing skills on a par with other kids her age. Charlotte lost both hands and both legs to meningococcal septicemia, but hers is not the sad story you might expect.
I think some people are surprised when they see her, like how mobile she is and how she can write and draw, and you know, her sort of the finer motor skills she's still got even without her hands. You know, even though, like I said, she's so independent and so able, she does need help with things.
I do not.
You don't need help?
Definitely not. This one is my old leg.
Charlotte shows me the false limbs she's had so far. Prosthetic legs, basic, yet do the job. But for hands, it's not so simple.
Did it go on this arm or this arm?
One.
That arm. And then this goes round the back.
This crude hook will be little use as she grows up and has to fend for herself.
Like that.
Though anything more sophisticated costs the earth.
An adult bionic hand was 40,000 for one hand.
And at the rate children grow, she'd need a new, bigger one every year. But this could be the answer, and at a target price of £1,200, it's within range of normal families.
If I flex my muscles, the hand in response will open and close all of the fingers.
First, a 3D scan is made using a tablet computer. Then a 3D printer constructs it, bit by bit. For the first time, these techniques are being combined to custom build a robotic hand.
At the moment, children are a bit underserved by the prosthetics industry in the realms of robotic hands. So this project can really help them because as a child grows, they need to have a new prosthetic every year or so, ideally. And that's where the cost component really, really helps out.
It's still at the prototype stage, but this new advance means that for Charlotte, a working hand is not far off in the future. The wait now, not decades or years, but maybe only months. Nick Ravenscroft, Sky News.
Okay, I'm sorry if some of you weren't able to see that. Was that a lot of people, or could I just ask how many people weren't able? I don't know if it's worth running again, or no, a lot of people. Okay. Okay, if you don't mind, okay, yeah. A lot of people seem to have been able to see it. So we could, so we will continue. And I think for those who weren't able to see it, I think Emily said at the beginning, she's going to be sending you the presentation stuff, and maybe there'll be a possibility for you to see it again, or we'll find a link by which you can see it again. Basically, it was a news report about technology and what you would, about a 3D printed prosthetic arm. And what you'd be asking the students, the kind of obvious focus for the video, is what are the benefits of this technology? What does this technology enable this little girl to do that she couldn't do before? And the answers were, in fact, that it was a very affordable piece of technology, and it was actually much more sophisticated. It was a much better prosthetic arm than she had had in the past. But actually, that wasn't why the report was memorable. It was memorable because it was framed in the context of a personal story. There was a very strong human element to it. And that's often the case with stories, that they have a human element. They're set in a social context. We can relate to them in that way. And when we hear stories or see stories like that one, certain events in them will resonate with us. That's what we call episodic memories. So we remember parts of them more strongly than others, but from that, from those episodic memories that stick in our memory, we're able then to reconstruct more easily the rest of the story, the other events in the story. Perhaps I could just ask you now, which part of the video, which kind of episodic memory, if you like, which part of the video was most vivid for you? Which events or which sort of actions or scenes in it were most vivid for you? Which do you remember the best? Just from having, I've seen it many times myself, but just from having seen it that once. Okay, so someone's saying the girl drawing without her, arms, good. Yeah. Seeing the little girl painting, good, good. Girl running to her mum on the playground, yeah, good, fantastic. Okay, for me, actually, the most vivid part, the part I've seen it a few times, as I say, because I wrote exercises for it. The most vivid part of it for me was when her mother's talking about her and saying how independent she is and that she can do a lot of things by herself, but even so, she does need help, her mother says, and the little girl says, I do not, like that. And it's a kind of lovely moment that she's just absolutely sort of confident in her ability to do things. And I think that brings up another thing here, which is the power of what I call the unexpected. Unexpected things also stick in our memory very strongly, and in this case, it was an image of the girl, as quite a few people said just there, the image of her drawing. It's absolutely amazing how what dexterity she has and how easily she can draw and what beautiful pictures she can draw without having hands. She's just using the stumps on her arms. Good. Okay. So that brings us on to the role of emotion, and that was clearly connected to this video. I think we all know, don't we, that we remember most clearly the things which have had a strong emotional impact on us, be that a negative impact or a positive impact. Whether it was an embarrassing moment or a very romantic moment, for example. When it's others' emotions at play, as in the case of this video, it stimulates empathy in us. And that also has a similar emotional impact on us. So it doesn't have to be our own emotions directly concerned. We can also get emotional engagement from those feelings of empathy. So we can choose content that tries to, which has an emotional impact and that students can engage with emotionally. But we also need to think about the general conditions in our classroom and how that can affect students' emotions. Of course, in many ways, that can often be out of our control. It's not something we have absolute control of at all. But what I'm kind of interested in is how the general atmosphere in the classroom affects students' emotions and in turn then affects their learning capacity. So I'd just like to ask you, what kind of atmosphere do you think is good for learning? Do you think, for example, a relaxed atmosphere is a good thing? Do you think a competitive atmosphere is more conducive to learning? Do you think it should be challenging? Do you think something else? Okay, so challenging we're getting, motivating, lack of stress, good, safe, people are saying, non-judgmental, fantastic, yeah, enjoyable, fun, that idea coming through, good, yeah, motivating, active, people are saying, good, challenging is coming through a lot, good, safe and supportive, yeah, good. You've actually kind of hit the nail on the head there. It's actually proven that if a student is made, or if a learner is made anxious by the act of being asked to remember something, then their ability to remember will be compromised. It will be adversely affected. On the other hand, if the student is too relaxed, their capacity for learning is also reduced. So what does that mean? It means that what we have to do, according to Earl Stevick and others, is have the students in a state of what is called, perhaps unfortunately, a state of moderate arousal. That is to say, not too stressed and not too relaxed. What does that mean in teaching terms? It means putting them on the spot, testing them, of course, but doing it in a supportive and friendly way. And that kind of testing is something we should be doing all the time. I don't mean testing in the sit down and do this test kind of sense, although that does play a role, and it definitely does help memory when people have to revise for tests and have some slight pressure of a test. But what I actually mean is kind of consolidation, and that's really one of my key messages here. Is a kind of ongoing consolidation with our students that's not competitive but actually collaborative, that they're sort of helping each other in the classroom to consolidate the learning that they've done. Let's just have a look at what that looks like in practice. Let's just go back to the idea of the video, and it was a video showing 3D printed 3D printing technology. And so you might give them these key words, or perhaps they might brainstorm the words, and then describe the process to each other. Similarly, you might ask them, you might go back at the end of the lesson after you've done other exercises, after they've done some sort of discussion activity, just go back and prod their memories and say what in the story wasn't very sophisticated. Well, it was in fact that girl's arm, the one she was using at the moment, which just had this single sort of thumb and hand action. What was remarkable, or maybe it was the way she was drawing. What was a prototype? Question them about what that was. And then you might ask them to take certain key phrases from it. Bit by bit, does the job. And instead of applying them to the thing they'd learned, say apply these to another device. That's what I mean by consolidation and collaborative consolidation. You're actually giving them, presenting them some of the language they saw, but asking them to apply it in different contexts. Okay. So that leads us on to the next areas, which are repetition and variation and a multi-sensory approach. Two important statistics here. The first one is this, from Gaines and Redman, who were kind of pioneers in the lexical approach in the 1980s, said that around 70 or even 80% of what we forget, not of what we learn, but of what we forget, is forgotten in the first 24 hours after initial learning. So there's a case, a very strong case, for follow-up and repetition and revision as soon as you can within that first 24 hours of learning. It's also said that language needs to be encountered and manipulated between 5 and 16 times, each item of language, before it's successfully committed to longer term memory. So various academics, they don't actually all agree about how many times it is, but it's somewhere within that range. And I suspect that that's probably more than you would have thought. I don't know if there are any Japanese people in the room at the moment. I don't think there are. So forgive me, I'm just going to say something to you. It's Watashi no namae wa Paul desu. Once again, Watashi no namae wa Paul desu. I heard that phrase 30 years ago. It was my first lesson in a CELTA course on my own teacher training course, and we were given a demo lesson in Japanese, and we were taught how to ask and say each other's names. It's 30 years ago. Why do I still remember it? I've never been to Japan. I've never used that phrase or any other Japanese phrase since. I guess you could say that my emotions were heightened. It was a new experience. I was with new people. I was put on the spot a little bit, perhaps. But I don't think that's the principal reason. I think the principal reason is because I heard and used that phrase about 20 times in the space of half an hour before it was committed to the whiteboard, before I ever saw it written. That kind of drilling and repetition is kind of largely out of fashion now. Personally, I think it's a little bit of a shame because I still think it has a very strong place in the teaching of pronunciation and for dialogue building, in functional dialogues and so on, particularly with lower level learners. But it seems, yes, that it's not actually that kind of drilling and repetition that we have to do. We can do it in a different way. If you just remember the statistic which suggests that we ought to be doing this kind of repetition within the first 24 hours, we'll just have a look at how that might work. So I'm going to give you an example of this. And the example again is taken from the same unit about technology, and it's for it's about teaching the vocabulary of materials. So the first time the students encounter this, they're going to simply match these different materials to pictures. Okay, fairly straightforward exercise. Then they're going to listen to somebody speaking and explaining the basics of 3D printing and what this technology is all about, because we hear it talked about a lot, and a lot of us don't really know what it means. And those materials will then feature in that listening. So they'll hear them in context. After then doing some exercises and perhaps manipulating them a little bit more in speaking, with the listening comprehension exercises, at the end of the lesson, we then go to this review. This is at the end of the unit. It's a kind of review of the language they've learnt. And now they're asked to, if you just look at the exercise in front of you, what they're asked to do is they see materials matched to certain objects, but not necessarily the most obvious objects. So what they're asked to do here is to rearrange the materials to next to objects which perhaps are more likely or more obvious or more common. So they might say a cotton sheet, for example, or a leather wallet or whatever. Okay, so there's no particular right or wrong here, just some things which might be more appropriate than others. Okay. Then a little later, perhaps at the beginning of the next lesson, you might ask them to do this, and perhaps I'll ask you to do this first exercise here. I want you to use these materials, and I want you to take a material and for some of these metaphors and say, or similes I should say really, what would you say for the first one? My steak was like Yeah, leather, someone said. Okay, fine. Stone, well, okay, rubber, yeah, good. Cardboard, discussed. Okay, good, yeah. Very often, I think most commonly in British English, I don't know if it's the quality of our steak here, we say rubber, yeah. What about the frozen ground? The frozen ground was like, good, yes, it was like glass, good, very slippy, and anvil, concrete, good, so it was very hard and so on, good. His skin was like, his skin was like velvet. Ah, nice. Leather at the other end of the scale. Okay, two ends of the spectrum there. Fantastic. Good. So you can see there's no right or wrong here particularly. It's getting them to play with the idea. And the last thing you might do is this activity here. You might then get them to mime one of the sentences. So they go back and one person mimes one of these sentences, like the steak was like rubber and chewing like that, and the other one has to guess the sentence. Okay. So what you can see here, what's happening, is that the students are encountering language all the way through in a variety of ways. They've seen them, so they do it visually, they do it auditorily, they hear it through the listening passage. They then apply them literally to objects which they're familiar with, and then metaphorically, as in this exercise here. And lastly, then they do a kind of miming activity, a sort of action activity. That kind of is a multisensory approach. And it's commonly thought that multisensory approaches to learning make for more effective learning. It's commonly said now, and you'll find quite a lot of, it's a popular theme at the moment in language teaching. Strictly speaking, multi-sensory learning is actually using more than one sense at the same time in the process of learning. So listening while reading, for example, it's actually a feature of Life Second Edition, and I think quite a lot of books now, where you have a text on the page, you're also given the opportunity to listen to it at the same time. And it's actually known, studies have shown, it's actually known to yield better comprehension results than if you were simply listening or reading in isolation. I do a blog on the In Focus website, and I'll be devoting the next one, not the next one I do, but the one after that, I'll be devoting much more space to multi-sensory learning, but we're a little short of time here, so I'm going to continue now with the next items that we described. The next two are about relatability and utility. Clearly, a key factor in retaining language is how useful it is to you. That is the utility factor. You'll obviously remember the name of your own job much better than you will someone else's job. You'd remember the phrase, "Could I have a receipt, please?" Much better if you're someone who travels a lot for business than if you were just a regular tourist who didn't need to pick up receipts here and there as they traveled. And this is the argument for you asking your students what language it is they need, what's really useful to them. And I think that's very important to do. I don't know, perhaps a lot of you do it already, sort of when it comes to giving them lists of functions and you get them to tick which ones are important for them. I think naturally the useful language, the language with a high utility factor, is going to resonate with them better. Relatability means how easily language relates to your experience, and that here is the case for personalisation. I'm not going to say a lot about personalisation because I think my colleague and co-author John Hughes already delivered a webinar on this. I simply want to say this, that personalisation doesn't necessarily mean talking about your personal life. Students may often, the classroom may often not be the place for that. In fact, it may often be too personal a thing. So where you ask them about likes or passions or ambitions or fears, maybe it's not necessarily that I'm talking about here. More often, what personalization means in this context is asking the students to give their perspective on something. So revising language and recycling language using personalisation might look like this. So you've given a lesson where they've had certain expressions to do with personalities, a control freak, a free spirit, that kind of thing. So you just ask them afterwards to talk about two of their friends or family using some of the collocations they saw in the unit. Simply ask them to go back over the unit or the lesson and find two pieces of language which they found useful for them, and then explain to their partner or to the class why they were useful to them. Pick a character from the lesson, for example, the little girl Charlotte that we saw in the video, and say what qualities you admired in them or didn't like in them, if that be the case, if it was a less pleasant character. Similarly, asking them which words might have had a positive association for them, so you bring back vocabulary, let them encounter it again and talk about it in another way. Take a key sentence from the unit. Perhaps it was in a grammar box somewhere. It was an item of grammar, a grammatical sentence that was presented in a grammar box, or a functional phrase, again presented in a functional box, and ask them to alter them, to swap them round in some way, change the information in them so that they're true for them. Okay, so these are very simple things. It's not rocket science. They're just simple things, but just ways of applying language so that they see it from their perspective. Good. And that's what I mean by relatability. Good. The last point we'll come to is the question of peer teaching. I don't know if anybody, you probably know this. I think it's a saying of Confucius, or I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. And there's one more, in fact. There's one more which is missing, which I haven't written, and we're going to see that in a moment. Does anybody know what it might be, given that the title of this slide is peer teaching? Does anybody have an idea what this one might be? So I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand, and I teach. Good. I teach and I learn. Good. Yes, it's that idea. Fantastic. Yes. Good. Good, good. Yeah, I teach and I master, in fact, is the expression. I have a classical background. I studied classical languages myself. And so when I came to teaching English, and the first time I came to learn about teaching English, frankly, I thought I knew it all when it came to English grammar. I thought I understood the grammar really well. And I thought I wasn't going to have any trouble teaching students grammar. It wasn't going to be a difficulty for me. But I have to say, it probably wasn't until the 12th or 15th time that I taught the present perfect that I actually began to understand it properly and to really get all its subtleties and nuances. And all that came, in fact, through the act of trying to explain something. It's a very powerful tool in learning and memory. And that's another thing that I'd urge you to do with your students, is to flip that role and to give them the opportunity to explain things in the language to their peers, to other people in the class. You might do it, they might simply try and explain how a piece of grammar works. They might do something like this, where you've been looking, for example, at verb patterns, where the verbs take the infinitive or the gerund or both. And so in this case, they're simply asked which pairs of phrases mean the same thing, and if they mean something different, can you explain what that difference is? Or you might actually get them, rather than doing exercises all the time, you might actually get them to make an exercise. So rather than make a whole crossword, just make a mini crossword. Take two new words from the unit or the lesson that you've just had and just put them in the form of a crossword. So just make sure that they cross somewhere like that, and then write the clues for your partner to do. So they actually have to write definitions, which makes them think more about the meaning of the words. Similarly, instead of giving them a gap fill, ask them to write one. Simply take a functional phrase that they learnt and gap 2 of the words from it, and then ask your partner to write the missing words. So, as I say, just getting them to make the exercises as well as to do them. Good. So, that kind of brings me more or less to the end. We're running a little short of time. I just want to go back over the things that we've looked at and just recap on those. We looked at the question of impact, and one of the most important things, and one thing that will probably determine how often a student has to encounter language before they remember it, will be with what impact it hits them. And we said that those things could be, greater impact could be given to that first encounter with language by the use of imagery. So either external images, powerful images that you show them, or by the power of visualization, through compelling stories and through emotion, things with which they can have an emotional engagement. Secondly, that idea of repeating things, bringing things back from shorter term memory, repeatedly, which helps to fix them. Doing that in a way which is varied, so they're not constantly seeing language in the same context, but in a variety of contexts, and using a variety of senses to do that. That language is relatable, that they feel they can have a connection with it, and that it's useful to them, the utility factor. And lastly, through the use of peer teaching, by getting them to explain how the language is working in a particular way, or making exercises for each other to do. Let's just have a look. Go back to, oh, what happened? Oh, I've lost my original things. I just want to go, I'm going to go back. Ooh, sorry. I just want to go back to my original slide. If you remember, I showed you right at the beginning 3 things that I remember, and I talked about another one. And I just want to look at those again, and then in the context of what we've been looking at, just think about why it is that I remember these things. So if you remember, it was the fact that Einstein didn't wear socks. Why has that stuck with me? It's not relatability. It's not because I don't wear socks either or have especially long, big toes. I think it's that element of the unexpected that we talked about with the little girl. That it's a piece of information that came a little bit from left field and stuck with me because it was unexpected. Why did I remember this picture of a little girl so strongly? That is certainly relatability for me. I have 3 young daughters. We sat round the table often, and often, I say this in the warmest possible way, they might sulk or feel a bit exasperated or annoyed with their parents and so on. So that just resonated with me very easily. What about this memory? This is a classic example of an episodic memory. If you remember, I said what I remembered about Bucharest was walking across this field and piece of waste ground to look for a supermarket. It wasn't that the other memories aren't there, but it's actually, this is what I first think of, and then I reconstruct the other memories around them. So it's an example of like a snapshot memory in an episode, the episode in a story, like an episode in a story, the story being my visit to Romania. The other one I was going to show you was this expression, watashi no namae wa Paul des, was the Japanese expression I learnt just that once and never used thereafter, that stuck with me. And that was clearly a case of repetition over a short period of time, of being asked to pull something back from working memory again and again and again in such a way that it stayed in my memory. Good. That's about all I have to say for now. I've done a series of blogs which discuss these things in greater length on the In Focus website. I'd just like to say that some of these ideas, and more in fact, are featured in the second edition of Life, which is here, and also on the Classroom presentation tool, but a lot of them are featured in the review units where students are given a chance to recycle language that they have encountered in the main parts of the units themselves, and then they see it and manipulate it in various ways. Okay, so thanks very much for your time and attention.
Thank you so much, Paul, today for the webinar. It was extremely informative and interesting. So just some final words for you all. Many of the examples, as Paul mentioned, are from National Geographic Learning's Life, the second edition, which is due out this year in 2018. We will be emailing you all a certificate of attendance, the slides from this webinar, a recording, and a project pack from Life. So just stay tuned for that. You should get it in about 3 to 5 business days. And if you enjoyed today's session, please make sure to subscribe for future webinars. We do have them for adults, teens, and young learners, and we have a whole series coming out this spring, so we'd love to see you at more webinars. And make sure to check out the InFocus blog, which Paul, as he mentioned, is a contributor for. He will have a post out this week, and it relates directly to this webinar. So, all right, I hope everyone has a great night. And last but not least, we do have a survey that you will be directed to, so we'd love if you could give us feedback for that to help us inform future webinars. All right, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Paul.
Okay,
Bye.
thanks a lot. Bye for now. Cheers.